The blood on the asphalt should have been the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Officer James Allen stood in the middle of Redwood Ridge Highway, breath fogging in the cold morning air, staring at the thin crimson streak that dragged itself from the tree line to a tiny shape wobbling in the road. The mountains were still half asleep, wrapped in mist, but all James heard was the ragged, wet breathing of the injured puppy stumbling toward him. In all his years patrolling these backroads, crashes, fallen hikers, even a cougar mauling once, he had never seen a creature this small leave a trail this dark. The puppy collapsed right at his boots. It tried to drag itself one last inch, then folded into a trembling heap, whimpering so softly James had to crouch to hear it. No bigger than a pair of leather gloves, its fur was streaked with dirt and blood, one leg twisted at an angle that made him gently suck air through his teeth. "What happened to you, little guy?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. He reached out, palms steady, and the puppy, weak and shaking, pressed itself against his touch as if clinging to the first safe thing it had found all night. James lifted the fragile body into his jacket. The heartbeat fluttered against his chest, faint and fast, fighting for every second. The forest behind him was too still. Even the birds weren't daring to sing. He turned to scan the tree line, routine, instinct, something drilled into him after years on the job, and that was when he saw it. Shape. Large one. Moving low, silent, deliberate. Much too big for a dog. Too smooth in its stride to be a deer. It watched him, not with fear, but with intent. Then it slipped back into the trees without breaking a branch. James swallowed hard, holding the puppy a little closer. If you believe every life, big or small, deserves the chance to be protected, you're welcome among us. People like you keep stories like this alive. He bundled the pup into his patrol car and drove straight to his cabin deep in the ridge. The roads were empty, the sun just touching the tops of the pines, and every few miles he glanced down at the little bundle in his lap to make sure it still breathed. Inside the cabin, he laid the puppy on a towel and went to work. Warm water, clean cloth, splinting the leg. The pup whimpered but didn't resist. His trust was immediate, complete. "Hang in there, Timber," he murmured, giving the name without thinking. The little dog's coat reminded him of fresh-cut bark. The fire crackled to life, warming the room. Slowly, the puppy's breaths deepened. Its tiny chest rose and fell more evenly. Its eyes flickered open for just a moment, and James froze. Amber. Bright, reflective amber. Not the soft brown bulldog eyes he expected. He blinked it away, blaming the firelight, exhaustion, adrenaline, anything but the quiet voice in the back of his mind. He fed Timber a mixture of formula and warm water, one careful drop at a time. The puppy nudged weakly toward the dropper, hungry enough to fight through the pain. Hours passed. Outside, the forest stayed silent. No wind, no birds, no movement. Timber slept curled near the stove, breathing steady now. And James, for the first time in months, didn't feel the weight of silence pressing down on him. Instead, he felt purpose. Small, fragile, but alive. He drove Timber to the vet the next morning. Long roads, soft whimpers, a cardboard box padded with towels in the passenger seat. The vet examined him, shrugged off the oddities, and sent them home with medication and a feeding schedule. Routine. Normal. If James wanted to believe that. Back at the cabin, night settled in quickly. The trees were black silhouettes against a sky of fading blue. The world felt held in a breath. James stepped outside to grab firewood. That was when he saw it. Claw marks, fresh, deep, and streaking down the side of a pine tree. 7 feet up. He stared at them, throat tightening, breath frozen mid-step. Something had been here. Something tall. Something strong. Then, from the forest, a soft crunch of snow. James turned his head slowly. Between the trees, a pair of glowing eyes watched him. Then another. And another. The shapes didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. James backed toward his door. Timber whining softly inside as if he felt the danger. When the door shut behind him, he leaned against it, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the dawning realization that whatever had attacked Timber wasn't done. And it wasn't alone. This was the moment the story truly began. The moment James Allen unknowingly stepped into a conflict far older, far wilder, and far more dangerous than anything he had ever patrolled. James stayed pressed against the cabin door for a long moment after the eyes vanished, listening. The night on Redwood Ridge had gone still again, ominously, unnaturally still. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Only Timber's soft, frightened whining pulled him back into motion. He slid the deadbolt in place, exhaled slowly, and knelt beside the tiny pup curled on the blanket near the stove. Timber stirred, stretching his splinted leg with a faint whimper, and James gently rested a hand on his side. "You're safe," he whispered. "I've got you." He wasn't sure if he was reassuring Timber or himself. The fire snapped, washing the room in warm orange light as James checked the splint again. The tiny leg was still swollen, but the bleeding had stopped. He fed Timber another slow drop of formula, his big hand steady while the pup's little tongue pushed weakly at the dropper. Timber's trust was immediate, total. He pressed his head against James's palm as if he'd known him forever. And for someone as isolated as James Allen, that small gesture hit deeper than it should have. He stroked the puppy's bark-colored fur. "Timber," he murmured again, committing to the name. "You're Timber now." The pup's tail thumped once against the towel, slow and tired but full of meaning. A tiny, grateful heartbeat in the silence. James sat back, letting Timber rest, and the familiar ache of loneliness crept up on him. An old companion he hadn't been able to shake for years. 6 years on the highway patrol. 8 years of marriage that had cracked under weight neither of them could carry. Long nights on duty, missed dinners, silence where affection used to be. His wife had finally said it softly, almost gently. "I can't be with someone who's never really here." She wasn't wrong. He had loved her, but the job kept him everywhere but home. Accident scenes, late shifts, emergency calls. Eventually, even when he was physically in the house, he wasn't present. He was thinking of tire marks on asphalt, bruised drivers, flares burning dim on wet pavement. After the divorce, he buried himself in work, lost in routine and report writing, feeling more like a machine than a man. He'd moved to this remote cabin hoping the solitude would reset something inside him. Instead, it had amplified the emptiness. But tonight, because of a broken little creature he'd found bleeding on the road, he didn't feel empty. He felt needed. He leaned closer to Timber. "You picked the right road, buddy." The pup's breathing deepened into sleep. Outside, the woods groaned with shifting branches, and James' eyes flicked to the window. The memory of that huge shadow watching him pulsed in the back of his mind. He swallowed and forced his thoughts back to the task at hand, caring for Timber. Hours slipped by. He warmed the room, fed Timber again, cleaned the wounds with gentle hands. The bond grew fast, faster than he could have expected. Every time James moved, Timber weakly tried to follow with his gaze, tiny tail giving a hopeful twitch. Toward midnight, James finally sank into his worn recliner. Timber slept curled in a nest of towels close enough that James could reach out and touch him. As the fire dimmed, the room settled into a quiet that was almost peaceful, until James noticed something. Timber's paws. He frowned. They were big, much too big for a bulldog pup. Broad pads, strong structure, claws already thickening. He told himself he was imagining it. Then Timber shifted, turning his face toward the firelight, and his eyes caught the glow. Umber. Reflective. Like polished metal catching a flare. The pupils didn't widen. They sharpened. Predator eyes. James blinked, shook his head, rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm tired," he muttered. That's all. He was exhausted. He'd been up nearly 24 hours. Any pup could have odd features, especially injured ones. Still, a faint unease tugged at him. Just past 1 in the morning, Timber startled awake with a tiny growl, deep for his size, rumbling in his chest like something twice his weight. The sound shivered up James's spine. Timber was facing the window, staring at the darkness. James pushed himself from the chair and knelt. "Hey," he whispered. "It's okay. Nothing's out there." But Timber didn't stop. Even after James picked him up, he kept growling toward the window, low and continuous. Something moved outside. James froze. Crunch in the snow. Low. Heavy. He held Timber close, feeling the pup's heartbeat accelerate. The growl never stopped. And then it came. A sound rolling through the woods. Deep, resonant, vibrating through the very walls of the cabin. Not a wolf's howl. Not a coyote. Nothing he had ever heard echoed like that. It wasn't a call. It was a warning. A presence announcing itself. Timber whimpered, burying his face in James's jacket. James held him tight, breath shallow, every muscle locked. The howl vibrated a second time, closer now. Something enormous was out there. And it was looking for them. James barely slept. Not after that howl. Not after the heavy footfalls circling the tree line. By dawn, exhaustion buzzed behind his eyes, but caution and curiosity tugged harder. He needed answers. Needed to know what was stalking the cabin, what had followed Timber sent through the woods with such deliberate intent. So he drove into town, bought 4 trail cameras, and spent the rest of the morning fastening them around the property. One facing the driveway, another aimed at the back clearing, and 2 deep in the pines. When the sun dipped and shadows swallowed the ridge again, James checked each window twice, fed Timber, stoked the fire, and placed the pup's basket near his recliner before settling in for the night. He didn't have to wait long. Sometime around 2 a.m., the motion alert on his phone buzzed. James bolted upright. Another buzz. Another. Then 4 in rapid succession. His pulse hammered as he opened the trail cam app. The first image loaded. And every hair on his arms rose. A creature, massive, thick with muscle, stood at the edge of the clearing. Its shoulders were broad, sloping into a powerful frame that dwarfed even the largest wolf he'd ever seen. Stripes of darker fur banded its sides. Its snout was elongated, almost prehistoric, and the eyes, God, the eyes, glowed with an intelligence that didn't belong to any animal he recognized. James whispered, "What are you?" Timber shifted in his basket at the sound of his voice. The pup blinked awake, ears lifting, body tense. As James swiped to the next image, Timber began trembling uncontrollably. "Easy, buddy." He reached down, but Timber didn't take his eyes off the screen. Click, next photo. The creature moved closer, head lowered, nostrils flaring as if sampling the air. Snow dusted its back, melting against the heat of its body. Its paws were enormous, far too large for anything that should have been walking the forests of Redwood Ridge. Timber pressed himself against James's leg, whining softly. Not fear. Not distress. Recognition. James froze. "You know her," he murmured. He didn't know how he knew, but looking into Timber's wide, shining eyes, watching the way his ears strained toward the screen, it clicked. This wasn't a predator drawn by fresh blood. This wasn't a random animal stalking his home. This was Timber's mother. The truth settled heavy and cold in James's chest. She'd followed the blood trail across the mountain road, found her pup missing, tracked him through the forest, all the way to the cabin. And that howl last night. Oh, searching call. A mother demanding an answer. James swallowed hard. "You weren't abandoned," he whispered to Timber. "She's been looking for you." The next motion alert buzzed. He tapped it open with shaking hands. This time, the creature wasn't at the edge of the woods. She was standing right beside the cabin, her massive frame angled toward Timber's window. Frost clung to her fur. Her breath fogged the glass. Timber whimpered, paw pressing against James as if unsure whether to get closer or hide. The creature's ears flicked. Her eyes narrowed. And she stepped closer, nose brushing the pain. James exhaled shakily. She's not giving up. But as the footage continued, something else became clear. She wasn't alone. Another alert. Then another. James opened a loop of images, 6 forms, smaller but equally powerful, emerging from the trees behind her. Their coats held faint versions of her striping, their eyes glinting with the same eerie focus. Back, coordinated, silent, deadly. They fanned out around the cabin, each moving with practiced precision, stopping at intervals like trained sentries. James felt his ribs tighten. Jesus! He wasn't dealing with normal wildlife. Not wolves, not coyotes, not anything he'd seen in a lifetime of wilderness calls. This was a species that shouldn't exist. Timber whimpered again and nudged the phone, as if begging him to understand. "I get it," James whispered. "I do. She wants you back." He lifted Timber gently, cradling him close as he watched the last image the camera had captured. The mother stepping out of the darkness, straight toward his front door, snow sinking under her weight, eyes locked ahead with unmistakable purpose. James leaned closer, breath hitching as the creature reached the porch. She stopped exactly on the spot where he had stood the night before, Timber wrapped in his jacket, bleeding and afraid. Slowly, deliberately, the mother lowered her head and sniffed the wood. The trail cam caught every second, the widening of her nostrils, the way her muscles tensed beneath her coat, the low, vibrating growl forming at the back of her throat. Not rage, not hunger, recognition, confirmation. Her pup had been here. James stared at the screen, Timber trembling in his arms, as the reality washed over him. This wasn't over, not even close. And the mother was getting closer. Every single night. James didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was staring at the final frame of the mother sniffing his porch. The next, Timber's soft whimper woke him, sunlight already cutting through the blinds. He sat up quickly, heart pounding. The phone buzzed on the table with new notifications. Not motion alerts. Messages. Missed calls. Voicemails. He frowned. He didn't give his number out much. Then he saw the sender of the first message. Tom Henderson. "James, call me. It's bad." A pit formed in his stomach. He opened another message. Link. Thumbnail. Trail cam footage. His trail cam footage. Posted online. The mother standing at his cabin door. The size of her. The glowing eyes. The smaller shapes behind her. His blood ran cold. Apparently, sometime during the night, his cloud backup auto-synced, and someone got access. A neighbor. The internet provider. Some local kid. It didn't matter. The video was out. And the comments were exploding. "What is that thing? That's not a wolf. Mutant. Shapeshifter. That's a bear-wolf hybrid, I'm telling you. They need to be put down before someone dies." A sick weight pressed down on his chest. He hadn't created panic on purpose. But panic was here. By midday, Redwood Ridge felt like a town preparing for a war. James drove through Main Street, Timber tucked safely in a crate in the back of the SUV. Every shop window had people huddled around phones, murmuring and pointing. At a gas station, 2 teenagers replayed the clip frame by frame. At the diner, locals crowded up against the counter, arguing. He heard snippets as he passed. Things the size of a damn elk. Whole pack of 'em. Did you see the eyes? That ain't natural. Mutant hybrids, that's what they say. Gotta protect our families. James gripped the steering wheel. They were wrong. About the mother. About the pack. They hadn't attacked him. They hadn't attacked anyone. They were searching, nothing more. But fear didn't care about truth. By late afternoon it escalated. He saw it in the parking lot behind the hunting supply store. 6 men, armed to the teeth, standing around a truck bed filled with rifles, bait, and enough gear to track an elephant. Tom Henderson was with them, trying and failing to calm them down. James pulled up beside them. Tom turned, relief flooding his face. "I've been calling you. It's getting out of hand." Before James could speak, a thick-shouldered man stepped forward. Clay Turner. A trapper with a reputation for shooting first, thinking later. "You're the one who posted that video?" Clay demanded. "No," James said. Someone leaked. Don't care. Clay jabbed a finger into James's chest. Those things need to be put 6 feet under. Look 'em. They ain't normal. They're not attacking anyone, James said evenly. They're searching for an injured pup. That's all. Clay snorted. That thing by your porch. That wasn't searching. That was sizing up a kill. James stepped forward, eyes hard. If she wanted me dead, I'd be dead. Tense silence. Timber whimpered softly from inside the SUV, sensing the tension. Clay's eyes narrowed. That the freak you pulled off the road? James didn't answer. He didn't have to. Clay smirked. Thought so. Another man spoke up. If that's one of them hybrids, it's gotta go too. Or it'll lead the pack straight into town. Tom shot James a helpless look, like he wanted to defend him but didn't know how. James felt something sharp and electric flare inside him. You're not touching him. Clay spread his arms. Then give him up. Let the government boys take him. Or we take matters into our own hands. The hunters murmured in agreement. James clenched his jaw. You're not starting a slaughter over a creature you don't understand. Clay leaned in close enough for James to smell the tobacco on his breath. This isn't about understanding, Clay growled. This is about survival. James held his ground. You're afraid of shadows. Clay sneered. And you're protecting monsters. James opened his mouth to argue, but something made him stop. A shape on the ridge. Dark, tall, almost blending into the trees. Butching. The mother. James's pulse hammered. The hunters didn't notice her, yet, but she was close enough that any wrong move could trigger disaster. Listen, he said quietly, urgently. Nobody fires a weapon in these woods. Not tonight. Not until we know more. Clay's lip curled. You don't give the orders here. I'm trying to keep you alive, James snapped. Clay's eyes hardened. Then hand over the pup. Before this gets worse. James stepped backward toward his SUV, blocking their view of Timber. No. Clay stared at him for a long, dangerous second. Then he spat in the dirt. You're making a mistake, Alan. James said nothing. Clay took a slow step forward. You listen to me, officer. You hand over that freak puppy. He lifted his rifle, resting it against his shoulder. Or the forest bleeds. Timber grew like the forest itself, quietly at first, then suddenly, explosively, as if something inside him had awakened and refused to slow down. It had been only days since Clay Turner's threat, but Timber already looked twice the size he had been when James first carried him off the road. His legs stretched out with startling speed, gaining muscle definition unnatural for a puppy his age. His paws, those oversized bark-colored things, seemed to belong to a creature far older, far wilder. James tried to make sense of it, scribbling notes in a journal the way he had during patrol training. Weight gain, abnormal. Strength, beyond expected. Awareness, advanced. Timber wasn't just growing. He was learning. Yes. The pup understood commands before James finished speaking them. He tracked scents with eerie precision, navigating the woods behind the cabin like a creature that had been born there, not rescued from a blood-stained road. When James set up small challenges, food puzzles, obstacles, toys, Timber solved them with methodical focus, almost strategy. He wasn't behaving like a bulldog or a shepherd, or any normal canine mix. He was behaving like something that had survived by thinking. One evening, while James chopped firewood, Timber sat in the snow a few yards away, head lifted slightly, ears twitching at sounds James couldn't hear. His amber eyes flicked from tree to tree with a quiet understanding. You're listening for them, James murmured. Timber's head tilted. He didn't deny it. The first call came the next night. James had just finished securing every window and door, double-checking locks not because he feared the pack, but because he feared what the hunters might do if they returned. Timber lay stretched across the rug near the stove, legs tucked, tail wrapped around himself like a curled branch. Then the world outside shifted. A long, low howl rolled through the woods. Not a wolf's howl. deeper, older. Something that vibrated through the walls of the cabin and sank into James's ribs. Timber shot upright, eyes wide, body trembling. "Easy," James whispered, kneeling beside him. But the pup wasn't afraid. He was listening. The howl rose again, echoing across the ridge. Timber's breath hitched. His throat moved. His ears pointed toward the window, toward the trees, toward the voice. "Timber," James started. Too late. A sound tore from the pup's chest. Not a bark, not a yelp, but a resonant rippling call that matched the howl outside. Perfectly. It wasn't a reaction. It wasn't mimicry. It was an answer. Conversation. James stumbled backward, heart pounding. You know them." Timber crouched low, tail straight, eyes burning with recognition. His entire body shook with instinct. Instinct he was no longer trying to hide. James sank into a chair, running a hand down his face. He had suspected Timber's lineage was unusual. Size, eyes, the impossible strength. But this, conversing with the unseen pack in the woods, this was something else. Something that didn't belong in any training manual or wildlife handbook. Timber let out another soft call, quieter this time. Almost pleading. James touched his shoulder. "Not yet, buddy. You're not ready." Timber didn't agree. James saw it in the tension of his muscles, the restless flick of his tail. The forest was calling him home. 2 days later, James's worst fear appeared in the form of a white government truck rumbling up the snowy dirt road. Wildlife Conservation and Research Division. Timber barked once, sharp and warning. "It's okay," James said, even though he didn't believe it. 2 biologists stepped out, one holding a tranquilizer kit, the other a clipboard. "We're not here to take him," the woman said quickly, sensing his posture. "We just need samples. Blood, fur, tissue swab." James crossed his arms. "Why?" She exchanged a glance with her partner. "Because whatever left those tracks, and whatever you're raising, isn't in our database." Timber pressed against James's leg, hackles raised but silent. The woman softened her voice. "We're trying to understand it, Mr. Allen. But right now the public is scared. Hunters are mobilizing. We need data before this turns into a cull." James felt his stomach twist. So this was how it started. Reluctantly, he let them into the cabin. Timber tolerated the exam, though his eyes never left the man with the tranquilizer case. His lips twitched once, just enough to reveal a warning gleam of teeth. Samples collected. Forms signed. A promise of results in a week. Then the truck disappeared down the hill, leaving the cabin quiet once more. James watched Timber pace the living room, restless, agitated. "It's okay," he murmured. But Timber wasn't listening. His gaze kept drifting toward the window, toward the trees, toward the pack. That night, the forest fell too quiet again. James sat by the fire, Timber curled at his feet, trying to convince himself everything would settle, that the hunters would calm down, that the DNA results would help, that the mother would keep her distance. Then Timber lifted his head. His ears shot forward, eyes blazing, muscles tense. "Timber," James whispered. The pup moved, slow at first, then with sudden, startling speed. He darted to the door, scratched once, then leaned back, gathering himself. "No, don't." Timber lunged. Before James could grab him, the latch gave. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and the smell of pine and snow. "Timber!" The pup sprinted into the night, legs carrying him faster than any dog his size should be able to move. His coat blurred into the darkness. James ran after him, boots slipping on ice, lungs burning. But Timber was already at the tree line. And beyond it, running straight toward the pack. James barely slept the night Timber vanished into the trees. He searched until his legs shook, until his flashlight dimmed, until the forest swallowed his voice whole. When he finally returned to the cabin, exhausted, frozen, terrified, Timber was there, sitting on the porch, just waiting. Snow clung to his fur. His breath came in fast puffs. His eyes glowed with something wild, something ancient. But when James approached, Timber lowered his head, pressed his muzzle into James's chest, and whimpered like the frightened pup he'd once been. James wrapped his arms around him and whispered, "Don't do that to me again." But the forest had already marked Timber as one of its own. And soon the rest of the world would know it too. The DNA results arrived 3 days later, delivered not by email, but by 3 black SUVs grinding up the ridge road, chains crunching through frozen gravel. James stepped onto the porch as the vehicles rolled to a stop. 4 officials in thick winter jackets stepped out, faces grim, badges glinting. Mr. Allen, the lead scientist, a tall man named Dr. Kellerman, called out, "We need to speak with you inside." James didn't move. Timber stood at his side, tail low, eyes tracking every stranger. "Say it here." Kellerman exhaled, breath fogging the air. "The DNA results are unprecedented." He opened a folder. Photographs, lab printouts, sequences marked in red. "Your animal, Timber, is not a dog. And he's not a wolf." Kellerman swallowed. "He's a member of a subspecies believed to have vanished over 10,000 years ago. Prehistoric apex hybrid. Near supernatural sensory development, advanced coordination, and potentially pack intelligence far beyond modern canines." James felt the ground tilt beneath him. "You're saying he's a relic. I'm saying he's a species the government will not allow to roam freely." Timber pressed closer to James, sensing the rising tension. The second official stepped forward. "Effective immediately. This animal is classified as a public safety risk. We're here to confiscate him under federal wildlife containment protocol." James froze. No, he's not dangerous." "It's not about danger," Kellerman said quietly. "It's about what happens if hunters find out what he is. Or if the pack becomes emboldened." 2 officers approached with a reinforced transport crate. Timber growled, deep, unfamiliar, primal. The sound rattled James's bones. "Easy," he whispered, dropping to his knees. He held Timber's face in both hands. "They're not going to hurt you. Promise. I'll fix this. Just trust me." Timber's trembling eased. His eyes, those ancient amber eyes, softened. He stepped into the crate only because James guided him there. The officers locked the door. Timber panicked instantly, thrashing, claws scraping metal, teeth baring at the bars. "Stop, stop," James shouted, voice cracking. "You're scaring him." But the crate was loaded into the back of an armored truck. Timber's howl came next. A long, shaking cry of terror that tore straight through James's chest and left him gasping. He slammed his fist against the crate's barred window. "I'll get you back. Do you hear me, Timber? I'm not letting them take you." The truck doors shut. Engines revved. Snow billowed as the convoy pulled away, taking Timber down the mountain. James watched the taillights disappear. And for the first time since his divorce, since the empty home and quiet nights, he sank to his knees in the snow and felt true, devastating loss. They took Timber to a government wildlife facility 20 miles east. High fences, motion sensors, 24-hour surveillance. The kind of place built not to protect an animal, but to contain one. James drove there the next morning, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He wasn't allowed inside. They told him Timber was secure. They told him Timber was calm. They lied. That night, the security camera feed leaked onto a ranger group chat. A sympathetic officer forwarded it to James. The footage showed Timber pacing in a reinforced pen, whining, body pressed against the bars as if trying to smell something beyond the walls. But the real shock came from the cameras aimed outside the facility. Dozens of eyes glowed in the tree line. A line of shapes, massive, silent, unmoving, stood just beyond the floodlights. Pack. Timber's family. Watching him. Waiting. James felt his pulse spike. They weren't leaving. They were planning. The next evening the alarms began. James was driving toward the facility again when the first siren split the night, red lights flashing across the valley sky. The radio crackled with frantic voices. Movement near the west gate. Shadows crossing perimeter grid. Something took out the cameras. James floored the gas pedal, heart hammering. He skidded into the parking lot as guards sprinted toward the fence. A klaxon blared overhead, bathing the snow in pulsing red light. "Everyone back!" a ranger yelled. "We've got multiple breaches." A metal clang cut through the air. James spun toward the west gate. Something huge moved behind it. A shape, sleek, low, powerful, slipped past the spotlights with unnerving grace. Then another. And another. The pack wasn't waiting anymore. They were coming for Timber. The night air was thick with tension, carrying the scent of wet concrete and fear. In the shadows surrounding the facility, the pack moved with precision. Every step was calculated. Every glance shared a silent command. They had one goal: rescue Timber. At the edge of the compound, a low growl rolled through the pack. It was Timber's mother, fierce and unyielding, eyes blazing like molten gold. She had been waiting for this moment, anticipating the attack. Her mind, honed by centuries of instinct, orchestrated the strike. She signaled with a sharp bark, and the pack responded instantly, splitting into coordinated units. A series of calculated moves brought them to the outer perimeter. Security cameras blinked into life, but the pack moved faster than the eye could follow. Metal gates groaned under pressure, clawed and kicked open by a swarm of canine determination. The facility's alarms began their shrill wail, cutting through the night like knives. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered as guards scrambled, their radios crackling in frantic bursts. But the pack had anticipated every move. They slipped through corridors, a silent storm, until they found the room. The glass enclosure that held Timber was more formidable than any cage, but not enough to contain what was meant to be free. The moment the lock clicked open, chaos erupted. Sirens blared, echoing against steel walls. Guards fired indiscriminately, the staccato of gunfire punctuating the air. Tranquilizer darts streaked through the chaos, embedding in walls, floors, and sometimes fur. But Timber, finally awake, moved with a speed and clarity that defied the dart's lethality. Timber's eyes met his mother's. For a fleeting second, recognition passed, a silent affirmation of everything they had fought for. He lunged forward, muscles coiled like springs. With a single bound, the cage shattered, metal twisting and sparking under the force. Timber was free. The pack moved in unison, protective and relentless. Guards fell back, some retreating in shock, others incapacitated by the swift intelligence of the assault. The hallways became a blur of motion, shadows, fur, gunfire, and the shrill cries of panic. Timber ran, but then instinct hesitated. Someone made him pause. James. He stood frozen, heart thundering in his chest, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. Timber's ears twitched, and the world seemed to narrow to this singular point of connection. He darted forward, but not toward the exit. Not toward the pack that had risked everything to save him. He ran into James's arms, a collision of trust and raw emotion. James's hands trembled, wrapping around Timber's chest, holding him close as if letting go was impossible. Timber pressed his forehead to James's shoulder, a shiver running through his frame, not of fear, but of the profound weight of choice. The pack waited, just beyond the threshold, eyes flicking between Timber and James, muscles tensed for the next move. Timber's gaze swept the room, absorbing every detail. The flashing lights, the scattered guards, the shards of broken glass, the whine of the sirens. The moment stretched, suspended like a breath held too long. And then, without warning, a soft thud broke the fragile stillness. A tranquilizer dart landed on the floor, inches from Timber's paw, its tip glinting under the harsh lighting. The world seemed to slow. The sharp smell of chemicals cut through the metallic tang of blood and fear. Timber froze. His body coiled, ready to leap, but the dart's presence was a warning. A single, silent threat that could undo everything. James stiffened, eyes darting toward the shadows where the shooter had fired from. The pack growled, low and threatening, signaling that the storm was not over yet. Timber's breathing quickened, nostrils flaring. He looked at James, then at the pack, then back at the dart. A decision hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Run with the pack, or stay with the human who had been a lifeline through everything. The air vibrated with tension. Sirens wailed. Gunfire echoed. Somewhere a warning bell clanged. Timber's muscles tensed, ready for action, ready to make the leap that could change everything. But before he could move, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the answer that only he could give. Then the chapter ended, suspended in a heartbeat of uncertainty. The dart on the floor, the pack poised behind, and James holding Timber close. One decision, one moment, and everything would change. The highway stretched like a steel ribbon under the cold morning light, flanked by rolling hills that hid the pack's movements. But they weren't hidden for long. The hunters had tracked them, cutting off every escape, rifles leveled, fingers tight on triggers. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear, a tension so thick it pressed against James's chest. Timber pressed close to his mother, who had planted herself like a living shield between her pup and the looming danger. Her eyes glimmered with intelligence and raw instinct, the weight of centuries held in a single gaze. Every muscle in her body radiated vigilance. She didn't flinch as the hunters shouted, their words sharp and threatening, but her growl rumbled through the valley, a warning that vibrated in the bones of all who listened. James's heart pounded. He knew the stakes. One false move could end everything. And yet, instinct propelled him forward. Without a second thought, he stepped into the open, arms wide, positioning himself between the hunters and the animals. "Back off," he shouted, voice firm despite the tremor beneath. "They're not dangerous, at least not like you think." The hunters hesitated, rifles wavering, eyes flicking between the human in front of them and the mother behind him. Timber's mother didn't relax, but something subtle shifted. A flicker in her stance, a measured calm in her growl. She sensed the truth. This human had just risked everything to protect her pup. Time slowed. Timber nuzzled closer to James, tail brushing his legs. And then, almost imperceptibly, the mother lowered her head, the first sign of trust since the pack had been hunted, caged, and labeled a threat. Her ears twitched, her gaze never leaving James's face. Recognition, raw and undeniable, passed between them. He had saved her pup. The hunters exchanged nervous glances, some lowering rifles just slightly, the tension in the air still electric. The mother's presence was commanding, and James stood firm. For the first time, the gap between human and wildness felt bridgeable, held together by courage and care rather than fear. As the standoff settled, news helicopters appeared on the ridge, their rotors chopping the air. Cameras and reporters swarmed as experts stepped forward, clipboard in hand, waving laminated DNA results. Timber's lineage, the hybrid wolf canine species believed extinct for millennia, was no longer a secret. "Extraordinary," one scientist said, voice trembling with excitement. "The genome matches a prehistoric species. This changes everything." The media frenzy erupted instantly, a chaotic wave of shouting reporters, flashing lights, and the relentless questions of a world suddenly obsessed. Timber barked once, then hid behind his mother, while James shielded them, deflecting the cameras and murmured instructions. It was a moment of revelation, a collision of past and present, nature and human curiosity. By midday, the pack had slipped from the public eye, retreating to the sanctuary of James's cabin. The terrain was familiar to them, yet James noticed the difference this time. They were not only returning, they were bringing their wounded. Limbs grazed, fur matted, eyes tired but alive. Timber's mother guided them carefully, ensuring that every injured member reached the safety of the forested ridge behind the cabin. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but alive with a fragile hope. Timber curled at James's feet while the mother patted softly, nudging the wounded toward warmth and food. James moved among them with a strange mixture of reverence and responsibility. He cleaned wounds, administered makeshift care, and whispered reassurances. It was then that he realized something profound. Watching Timber playfully nuzzle a recovering packmate, hearing the low purr of the mother as she circled protectively, James felt the weight of belonging settle over him. This wasn't just a rescue or a temporary alliance. The pack had accepted him, not as a visitor, not as a helper, but as one of them. James froze, hand hovering over Timber's back. The truth hit with the force of the forest wind outside. He was part of their pack. Not by blood, perhaps, but by loyalty, courage, and the bond forged in fire, fear, and shared survival. A low howl echoed from the ridge, answered by Timber's mother. The sound carried through the cabin, through the trees, reverberating in James's chest. It was a song of triumph, of unity, and of something older than time itself. And yet, the moment was fragile. Through the cabin window, James caught the glint of a dart embedded in a distant tree, the faint green tip unmistakable. Someone or something was still watching, still threatening. The howl cut off abruptly, replaced by the tense hush of the pack sensing danger. Timber's ears perked. His mother's stance shifted from protective to alert. James's eyes followed theirs, heart pounding. He realized, being part of the pack didn't make him invincible. It only meant that whatever came next, he would face it not alone, but as one of them. The cliffhanger settled over the cabin like nightfall. Safety was temporary, trust was fragile, and the world outside still held dangers the pack had yet to confront. James exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the new reality pressing down. He reached out, placing a hand on Timber's head, then the mother's flank. The bond was real. The pack was his family. And the next challenge was already looming, unseen but inevitable. The ridge was quiet, for now, but the glint of the tranquilizer dart reminded him, the world had not finished with them. And James, finally, knew that to protect this family, he would have to embrace everything that meant. Redwood Ridge had always been a sanctuary, a fortress of towering trees and whispered winds. But now the forest itself had turned against them. Flames leapt from canopy to canopy, red tongues devouring centuries of history, filling the sky with choking smoke. The smell of burning pine and earth clawed at lungs, and the roar of the inferno drowned out every other sound. The pack scattered, senses in overdrive, paws scrabbling over rocks, roots, and ash-strewn undergrowth. Timber darted among them, ears pinned back, heart hammering, but it wasn't enough. The fire was spreading faster than instinct could outrun. In the distance, his mother's golden eyes were caught in a glow of smoke and fire, frozen under the threat of falling branches. Panic overtook Timber. His legs carried him forward before thought could intervene, weaving through smoke and heat, barking, whining, desperate to reach her. But flames blocked his path, walls of fire that seemed to pulse with anger. He skidded to a halt, growling at the impossibility, the heat pressing against his fur like a physical weight. James's instincts kicked in. Without hesitation, he ran, boots pounding through ash and charred debris, every step an act of reckless courage. The smoke clawed at his throat, embers stung his skin. Trees collapsed with explosive crashes, splintered trunks threatening to pin him at any second. Yet he didn't falter. Timber's frantic cries guided him like a compass. Through the haze he saw her, Timber's mother, caught under a massive branch, flames licking the edges, eyes wide with fear and pain. James skidded to a stop, inhaling smoke that burned like acid in his lungs. Ignoring the heat searing his arms, he gripped the branch, muscles straining as he lifted it enough to free her. "Come on," he gasped, hoisting her onto his shoulders despite the fire's relentless assault. The weight was immense, but James kept moving, stepping over burning roots, ducking under collapsing limbs. Timber bounded alongside him, barking encouragement, guiding him through the maze of destruction. Behind them, the rest of the pack formed a protective ring. Growls and barks melded into a living shield, fur singed but spirits unbroken. Their eyes glinted in the firelight, a reminder that though the flames were terrifying, unity could stand against anything. Branches crashed down around them, sparks showering like deadly rain. James stumbled, almost dropping the mother, but Timber leapt to steady him, body pressing against his legs, urging him onward. Every second was an eternity, every breath a battle. Finally, the three of them broke through the worst of it, emerging from the inferno's heart into the smoke-dappled clearing beyond. The fire raged behind them, but they were alive. Timber nuzzled his mother, checking her for injuries, while James collapsed to the ground, lungs heaving, eyes stinging from the smoke. The pack circled close, growls softening, tails brushing against one another in quiet relief. In the aftermath, officials and experts arrived, stunned at the sight of James standing among the pack unscathed, a bridge between species that had been thought irreconcilable. DNA samples, previous media coverage, and eyewitness accounts were compiled, leading to an unprecedented decision. James was granted a wildlife partnership permit. He would become the caretaker of Timber's pack, the human link that ensured their survival while respecting the ancient instincts and freedoms of the species. The cabin, battered by smoke but still standing, became the base of operations. Timber and his mother patrolled the perimeter, alert yet calm. The rest of the pack moved freely under James's guidance, trusting him implicitly. Together, they formed a community that defied the old rules, proving that understanding and compassion could bridge the chasm between human and wild. James sat on the cabin steps as dawn painted the ridge in soft gold and amber. Timber lay beside him, mother resting her head on his knee, eyes scanning the forest, always vigilant yet finally at peace. The world felt quiet, not just from the retreat of the fire but from the profound sense of belonging that hung in the morning air. If you believe family can be chosen, even across species, join our community by liking, sharing, or subscribing. Stories like this remind the world that compassion still matters, James whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He looked out over Redwood Ridge, watching the smoke curl and fade, the sun breaking through like a promise. Timber and the mother pressed closer, a living testament to resilience, trust, and the power of chosen bonds. For the first time in his life, James felt completely at home. The ridge had survived. The pack had survived. And together they would face whatever came next, not as human and wild, but as family. Dawn stretched across the horizon, gilding the treetops and casting long shadows. James, Timber, and the mother stood at the edge of the cabin, gazing over the recovering forest. The firestorm had taken much, but it had also given something eternal, a new beginning.